All right, guys, I'm going to finish up talking about the menstrual cycle. I haven't been using my backgrounds. So today I'm coming at you from, can you guess? That's right, Monica Geller's apartment and friends. Okay, so I found this slide. God, my slides are all messed up. What is up with this? Sorry. I'll fix this real quick. Jeez. Okay. All right. So anyway, we were talking about the LH surge in the last video where this is when all of a sudden the estrogen that is being released from that follicle is going to cause a positive feedback loop onto the anterior pituitary, and luteinizing hormone is going to surge, which is going to cause ovulation, which is going to cause the egg to rupture. So here's just a slide. This is what those sticks look like if anyone's interested in doing those. And then here's just some regular levels of the LH surge. I found this picture on another slide, so I thought I would share it. Okay, so now, of course, we have to talk about birth control and why birth control works. This is birth control pills and other forms of hormonal birth control. So the way this works is that these hormones have some combination. Different ones have different levels of different things, but they have a synthetic estrogen known as EE2. And so this is 17, instead of 17 beta estradiol, it's 17 alpha ethanol estradiol. Anyway, and it also has a form of progestin, which is a synthetic progesterone. And so what happens here is when you're taking these birth control pills, it keeps the levels of estrogen and progesterone constant, okay, in the body through the synthetic method. So by doing this, because estrogen is constant and it's not fluctuating, then LH and FSH never get the signal to increase or decrease. So the body's not selecting follicles without follicle stimulating hormone. So none of them are going to get selected. They're not going to mature. And because you don't have LH being released, you're not going to get that LH surge. So you're actually not going to have ovulation in this case. The other thing is because you don't have this fluctuation in estrogen, you also are going to have an inhospitable environment for the sperm. So without that change of estrogen, you don't have the change in cervical mucus. And remember I said in the last video that it really needs to be watery in order for the sperm to properly travel up into the fallopian tubes to find the egg when it is ruptured. So in this case, the cervical mucus doesn't change. And if it's really thick, then the sperm have a really hard time getting through it, and they ultimately can't make their way to the goal, even in the event that there was an egg there. So here we have follicles aren't being chosen. There's not going to be an ovulation event, and the cervical mucus is going to be too thick anyway for the sperm to travel through. The other thing that happens with progesterone is because this is a synthetic progestin, and again, we're not having a fluctuation. It's the fluctuations that are really, really important. Okay, so that's where it really comes in to be important. So because we don't have this fluctuation, you don't have the growth of the endometrial layer like you normally would when progesterone levels start to pump up with the corpus luteum. So again, you're not having this change of hormones. So you're not going to get this drop and increase in luteinizing and follicle stimulating hormone. And so the progestin, because of its constant nature, the endometrial layer never grows. So even if an egg was selected and released, and even if the sperm could get through all that thick mucus, even if the sperm meets the egg in this one 24-hour moment when pregnancy can actually happen, even if all those things happen, there's not going to be an endometrial layer that's available for that egg to attach to. So through all these methods is how birth control works to make sure that you don't get pregnant. It's also important to talk about testosterone. Oh, I forgot it moved. Oh yeah. Can't you tell I looked at my slides before I did this video? Anyway, so let's talk about testosterone for a moment. So testosterone is available for females as well. It comes a little bit from the ovaries, just a little bit, but then you also have it coming from the adrenal cortex. Remember, it's coming from the zona reticularis of the adrenal glands. So testosterone also peaks in mid-cycle. So right when you get that LH surge, LH is not only going to, it's going to filter back through and cause testosterone to be released from the adrenal cortex. So testosterone is increasing, and this is correlated in many studies with the motivation and desire, increased sexual thoughts, increased sexual fantasies, and increased sexual activity. So this makes sense. You've got testosterone, it's going to increase your drive, and so then you are going to get on it to get pregnant at the right times. Studies also show that if women take testosterone supplements, that it is effective at increasing motivation. So when you're taking birth control, because again, we're not having that fluctuation, it's going to cause these levels to be constant, and you're not going to have this burst of testosterone. So many women report when they're on birth control that they actually have lower levels of sexual motivation. However, because you're not worried about getting pregnant, then that in and of itself can increase motivation because you don't have to worry about anything. Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting a text. Sorry. Okay. So some things I want to talk about that change cyclically in women. I talk about this particular study. I love this particular study. I talk about this in 295. This study was interested in strip clubs. So these researchers went to strip clubs, and they were trying to determine women that were not on birth control, how much money they raked in nightly. And so they tracked their cycles, and they asked them how much money they made. And what they found was that just before ovulation is when these women were getting the most money. So something must be going on here that made them more attractive or something, so that they could get more money just before ovulation. These studies show that there was the women that were taking birth control, the money that they made remained constant throughout the cycle. Some other studies have suggested that right before ovulation, women become more choosy in their partners, and they tend to prefer more masculine traits. You might be thinking, what's a masculine trait? Well, things like a 5 o'clock shadow, having a lot of hair growth, having a sharp jawline or a square chin has been shown to be attractive. Women prefer more symmetrical faces during this time. So that's interesting. In the weeks, in that phase, the few days leading up to ovulation, women are more likely to seek out sexual experiences. During the luteal phase, when pregnancy is no longer possible, this is a time when, in studies, women tend to prefer female faces. This makes sense. They're preparing for motherhood, right? So they need to create their village to help support their child. Okay, so let's talk about amenorrhea. This is whenever the menstrual cycle stops, and this isn't menopause. This is when it stops due to other reasons. Many athletes, when they have very low levels of body fat, will actually cease having menstrual cycles. Stress, women on death row actually will have a cessation of menstrual cycles. It's important to note that this doesn't always happen. Because there are women that were in, say, concentration camps back in World War II that were still having cycles despite the immense stress that was happening at that time. So some other things that are natural: if you're pregnant, you're not going to have a period. When you're breastfeeding, you're also not going to have a period. And then, of course, menopause is included in there. And there are many birth control methods where you no longer have a period. Okay, so let's talk about menopause. We talked about andropause and how this affects men. So in menopause, this is an event when women are no longer able to conceive. So pregnancy is no longer possible. Fertility is done. So this is different than andropause in men, where they still can procreate. It's just the numbers of sperm and their fertility does decrease significantly, but they are still able to do it. So the average age of menopause is around 50. That's typical. There is a phase called perimenopause. Not every woman experiences this, but it can be up to 20 years before menopause actually happens. And this is whenever you'll start seeing changes in the cycle. Sometimes they get longer, sometimes they get shorter. Women will start skipping cycles, they'll skip ovulation, and it's just your body just starting to change, just starting to slow that process down. And certainly fertility rates drop drastically after 40, especially after 45. So these are some things that happen during menopause because those levels of estrogen are fluctuating pretty significantly. Women experience hot flashes, they have trouble focusing, trouble sleeping, and a lot of doctors will prescribe estrogen supplements to try and help with some of those side effects. Okay, this is worth mentioning. This was a question that came up last year in my in 380, and so I thought it was interesting because osteoporosis becomes a big problem after menopause in women, and here's the reason why. Again, this is not like my expertise, so bear with me through this, but and I have some explanations in the slides, like in the notes that I'll post when I post these slides up. You can check those out. So remember that bone is always being broken down and it's always being reformed. So when it's getting broken down, that's known as resorption. This is whenever the bone is being broken down and calcium is being released. I'm watching the time. At 8 o'clock, I have online trivia with my friends, so I'm really excited about that. So this is the breakdown, the release of calcium, and then the bones will be rebuilt. So ideally, the resorption rate is going to match the formation rate. As bone is broken down, it's going to be built back up. So these are just a couple problems when you have what's known as high turnover. That's whenever too much is being broken down. And when you have low turnover, that means too much is being formed and not enough is being broken down. So what happens normally in our reproductive years, estrogen is helping. And what it does is it prevents the breakdown. Of course, bone is always being broken down, but it prevents this breakdown of bone. So that when menopause happens and estrogen levels plummet, then bone is being broken down too quickly and it's not able to be built back up in the appropriate way. So that's when osteoporosis can hit, and that's how estrogen is involved in osteoporosis. For men generally have a much more dense bone mass than women, and certainly when testosterone levels start to drop, then therefore estrogen levels start to drop, and men also are at a risk of osteoporosis, but because their bones are so dense anyway, then typically it doesn't break down enough that they have a problem with this. All right, I think that's it. Yep, that is all. So thanks for hanging out with me on the set of friends today, and thanks. I will post more later.